This is a very interesting debate, because as one listened to the honourable gentleman, the member for Holborn and St Pancras, one discovered that really the Labour Party had nothing to debate at all, that they accepted my right honourable friends, the Secretary of State's assurances that he would keep the House up to date. They accepted that there would be no disclosure of material that was in any way damaging to the negotiations. Oh, and just to add a cherry on top of the cake that we're all looking forward to eating in due course, they have accepted a date for the implementation of Article 50. So Her Majesty's loyal opposition has reached the point of such loyalty that it's actually having a day's debate to back Her Majesty's government's policy. And I think this is a very interesting way of spending our time, and perhaps it should form a new means of having a consensus across Parliament that we should have the opposition supporting government policy. But you do wonder why they decided to have a day's debate on this, rather than the other things they could have debated purely to support the government. And I think the answer you come to is that actually, last night when the government put down its amendment, it cooked the opposition's goose. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, what this debate was really all about wasn't the form of words that were used, wasn't even the split infinitive that Her Majesty's opposition put into their initial motion. It was actually about seeking to reject the decision that was made by the British people on the 23rd of June. That is what underlines every bit of this. 1 minute, it is delay. And you have honourable gentlemen officers and honourable ladies, some even on this side, saying we're doing it too fast. We should slow down, we should be a bit more cautious, because it would be so dangerous to do what the British people asked us to do at the pace at which they expected us to do it. Surely that's not wise. So they delay it through applications to the court. And then they come to Parliament. Oh, how wonderful, the joy that suddenly so many members are in favour of parliamentary scrutiny. When I sat in here debating issues sent for debate by the European Scrutiny Committee, were the benches heaving? Time after time the Labour benches were only represented by their front bench spokesman. In the debates in committee put forward by the European Scrutiny Committee, where every member has an entitlement to turn up and be heard, do the debates run for the full 3 hours that they are allotted? Or do people try and get through them in about 10 minutes before they go back to signing their Christmas cards? Parliamentary scrutiny has become the watchword of people who held Parliament in contempt. And they bring it up. Why? Because they condescend to the British people. They think the British people got it wrong, and so I'm honoured to give way.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way, and he and I debated this very issue many times during the referendum campaign, and I must say very courteously, but does he not remember what he said so many times, that Parliament should be sovereign? And if Parliament is sovereign, surely we have to scrutinise and vote on the deal.
Parliament is indeed sovereign, and Parliament in its wisdom passed a referendum bill. And my right honourable friend, the Lord President of the Council, said that that was advisory. And just think about that. Who was it supposed to advise? Did Parliament pass a bill to advise itself? Surely not. If it had been to advise Parliament, Parliament would have made the bill automatically effective, because we don't need to advise ourselves on the bills that we should pass. It was clearly an exercise of parliamentary sovereignty to advise the Crown in the exercise of the prerogative. So parliamentary sovereignty has already been expressed and ought to be fulfilled. So those who are appealing now to parliamentary scrutiny are in fact rejecting a bill, an act passed through this House, and worse, they are rejecting our employers, our bosses, our liege lords, the British people, who decided this matter for us. And they use a language, a glorious language of which Lewis Carroll would have been proud, the Humpty Dumpty-esque approach to saying what they really mean. So even in this motion, when it was first brought forward, before the government had managed to corral it effectively into a government motion, they say how much they respect. Respect. The word respect has been changed by the lexicographers. It used to mean that one held in high esteem, in high regard, and believed should be implemented. Now it means condescend to, think ridiculous, think unwise. The word respect has been utterly devalued by those benches opposite, as they feel the British people got it wrong. Let us not use this word respect of the electorate anymore, Madam Deputy Speaker. Let us say obey. for we will obey the British electorate, and yes, indeed, we have a plan. There is a plan set out clearly, and that is that we will leave. And everything else flows from that. Everything else is leather and prunella. That leaving means, as the Prime Minister said, that there is no more superiority of EU law. The European Court of Justice, well, it may advise and it may witter on, but no more will it outrank this House, and that any contribution we make to the European Union will be from our overseas aid budget because it is supporting poor countries.
We miss you.
No, we don't.
Oh, we
He
do.
was a very unsuccessful American president, and his foreign policy was a catastrophe. Absolute catastrophe.
I think he was really successful and really brilliant and gave me hope for a better world.
Didn't even manage to close Guantanamo Bay, which he promised to do. Made a complete pig's ear of Syria and of the whole Arab Spring. I'm not saying we did it brilliantly, but America lost global leadership in the Middle East and has allowed Putin to take over in terms of policy formation in Syria.
We could all be to blame for that.
The British people have voted to leave. The House of Commons has voted to leave. Professor Grayling wants us to stay. I'm with the majority.
May I? Because this phrase, the British people, I do think it's the most terrific catchphrase. We're really talking about a quarter of the population when you sum up who that 37% of the restricted franchise was.
Well, I think this is such nonsense. The figure gets lower and lower
Jake,
for Professor Grayling's convenience. The British people voted in a fair election, and a majority voted to leave.
A minority
I think to call
of them
them the
did.
British people is extremely fair.
A minority of them did, and I have to say, with very great respect, that to see an old Etonian stockbroker on the far right of the Tory party representing himself as a tribune of the people, representing the interests of car workers in Sunderland, is mildly implausible.
Are you being Etonist?
What I want to say is that this
sure
referendum
that
was
either the
for...
professor of the New College of the Humanities or I should throw stones at each other about our backgrounds.
Well,
Particularly.
let me say this, that it's not the people that Mr. Rees-Mogg is representing, it's his people. Because the kind of Britain that he wants, a low-tax Britain, a Britain where there isn't enough money for the NHS and for state education and for welfare and for environmental
NHS
protection.
if we don't give it to the EU.
No, but you want to
as has been
privatise it.
said.
I mean, you don't use it, you want to
I don't
privatise
want to
it.
privatise the
You
NHS.
not
I've never argued for the privatisation of the NHS. You're putting words into my mouth.
No.
And prominent Leave campaigner during the EU referendum, Jacob Rees-Mogg, is at our studios in Westminster. Thank you for joining us. I'm sure you've scoured everything that Sir John had to say. This is the second former Prime Minister, both from different parties, that have felt the need to come out and warn not just the public but the government about concerns that they have in their experience about how Brexit has been handled.
Yes, well, the British electorate voted against what they recommended last year. And you have to remember that St John Major was remarkably unsuccessful in his own dealings with the European Union. He got us into the exchange rate mechanism, which was a catastrophe economically, and his failings in dealing with the European Union led to him taking to the Conservatives to their heaviest defeat for the best part of a century.
So you're saying this is personal. He actually admitted in his speech that the EU is not perfect. He's not talking about the EU, he's talking about Brexit. He's talking about what it means for Britain. He didn't say there should be another referendum. He said he's concerned about the way Brexit has been negotiated and handled.
It's a very negative speech, and it's pointing towards a second referendum. If you look at the bottom of page 13 of his speech, you will see a comment. He says, the more one examines probabilities, the more contentious becomes the task of leaving. That implies that he's not actually accepting the result of the referendum, that we are leaving. I think it's rather a bitter speech by a Prime Minister resoundingly rejected by the electorate in 1997 and his views once again rejected last June.
Can we just talk about a few of the things that he pointed out? He said that there was too much optimism for a good deal for Britain. He expressed concern about the way the government was treating European Union leaders. He said there needs to be more statesmanship. And he warned about the reliance on the United States.
Well, let's take those points in turn. The first point, I think, is completely fatuous, that when you enter a negotiation, any sensible person goes into a negotiation full of optimism and expecting a good result. To go into the negotiation wearing sackcloth and ashes and to say that it's all going to be a disaster, as Mr. Major, Sir John Major, suggests, would be absurd, and perhaps that's why he was so unsuccessful in his European negotiations. As regards our relations with European partners, actually I think Mrs May has been very positive, very friendly towards them, and has emphasised that it is the EU we are leaving, not Europe, and she's tried to be as generous as possible to EU nationals who are already here, only to be stymied by Mrs Merkel. And in regards to the point on the United States, I was surprised by his anti-US positioning, that the US is a close ally for us, but that he thinks the whole world is the US and Europe. It isn't. It's China, it's India, it's Brazil. We've got to look to the international field rather than purely the narrow EU sphere.
Well, Jacob, let me pick you up on that, because already Theresa May has been to India and agreed to relax visa regulations for Indians, particularly Indian students, but also those that want to come and live and work in India. So that could mean more immigration. And you know that one of the central messages of the referendum campaign to leave was about immigration. And EU leaders have made it very, very clear we cannot remain in the single market if we will not allow free movement into the UK.
Well, I don't want to remain in the single market because it's a regulatory trap. The regulations we get from the EU relate to the single market and have made our industry less competitive.
So there could be no deal then?
No, we're not going to remain in the single market. Mrs May has made that absolutely clear. She made that clear at her speech at Lancaster House. That's different from not having a deal. The deal will be broader simply than the single market. On your point on immigration, the question is, we will decide. And it may very well be in our national interest to have IT engineers from India coming rather than having Bulgarians coming over without so much as a by your leave.
There's a lot of fear as well about the so-called cliff edge. If a deal can't be reached, we still have to leave anyway. How can you assure people tonight, those who voted for Brexit, that this isn't leading over the cliff edge, that Britain isn't going to suffer, as John Major said tonight, economically as well as politically?
John Major and the people like him have been forecasting disaster again and again. It is the same old tune, the cracked record. I would say it's like Cassandra, except she got her forecasts right. It's just nobody believed her. They are full of gloom and depression, and they've turned out consistently to be wrong. That there are ways of dealing even with a cliff edge. I happen to think the cliff edge is unlikely, that there are WTO terms that we can fall back on, and that trade will continue because the British people want to carry on buying German cars and the Germans want to carry on using UK financial services. And that's done by individuals, not by states.
We're going to move not far away. We're going to Westminster Hall, where MPs are debating whether Donald Trump should be afforded a state visit to Britain. Two public petitions, one saying he's not wanted, the other arguing that as America's president, he's entitled to come. Let's join Paul Flynn.
You were in the crowd there with Les. He complained and lied about the own result that he had. And this was a great concern when you have a man who's the president behaving like a petulant child. How is he going to behave in a future conflict might arise? I give way to the honourable gentleman.
The honourable gentleman for giving way, and his response to Mr Trump's perhaps ill-considered phraseology. But what complaint did the honourable gentleman make when Emperor Hirohito came here, who was responsible for the rape of Nanking?
Yes.